So thank you guys very much for coming. I'm gonna there were a couple of things that people said I shouldn't do. I'm gonna do all those things. So I had all these ideas about the shit that I wanted to say, and I have notes and papers, but I think if I can start, I want to start by just asking, just generally what people think about failure in the room. Just throw it out to anybody. Now.
Fail every day in every way possible.
Is that a Britney Spears song, or it's just sounds like it? Process for learning?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Can't predict it.
Sorry?
Can't predict it.
Okay. I like that one actually. Did someone say Chris? Is that? Strength. Okay. So, when I was thinking about this and talking to my friends, and what really struck me about, possibly talking about this is, when I look at my life, I'm 31, I think that I've probably just failed everything. I tell people when I was born, my parents, they saw me, I have long fingers and long legs, and they were expecting me to be tall. That didn't happen, right? So that was the first, failure. So I think failure is very much attached to expectation. We have expectations, and we don't sometimes perform. Sounds funny, but we don't meet those expectations, and so there's failure. But then I was thinking about this more, and I came to the conclusion that maybe there isn't anything like failure, right? So maybe failure doesn't exist. So I'm just gonna give you, or tell you why, possibly. So I have these underlying ideas about the world. So the first thing that I think is everything is chaos, right? So we live in this place, and we're here in this space that's beautiful, with coffee, with people, but you can't hear me? Okay. I said my idea about the world is everything is chaos. Is that okay? But we're under the illusion that it's not chaos. So it's true, right? So there's chaos, and by the way, this shit is going to be really crazy like this. I'm just going to be rambling, so just bear with me. So my idea is that we live in a world full of chaos. Then we sort of, our job or our role in life is to create the order, that makes living possible. And then the other thing that I believe in is because of chaos and order, that things are arbitrary. So we have all these rules and standards that we have come to accept as law, but really they're just preferences that people had that are now institutionalized, and we now adopt those as our ideas. So those are my underlying, I guess, principles. And then, so even though I say there is no failure, practically, there is, right? So if you do something at work and you fuck up, you get fired, you probably failed, so that's a practical failure. But that is, in my mind, an external failure. So this is stuff that we expect. Stuff that is stuff that's produced from other people's expectations, or the expectations of the larger community. Can you guys still hear me? All right, cool. Or the larger community that we live in. So I call this, well, I'm calling it external failure, because it doesn't necessarily reflect like our own internal values, right? It's about my parents. Like my parents wanted me to be tall. I fucked that shit up. I'm not tall. So that's like an external failure in a sense. But then even if like we were able to overcome these like external pressures, right, and become quote unquote successful, then we have this added pressure of reality, right? So like an example is, and this might be a crazy example, right? So imagine like back in the day, right? So people used to ride horses and buggies and that kind of shit. And imagine there was somebody who like said, I can make this thing better. I can like put a strap between these two horses, sort of like make the wheels on the thing go faster. And then I'm going to make a lot of money, because money is really how a lot of times we value success. So this guy had this idea, or this lady had this idea, and she did it. But then simultaneously, there was somebody else working, and for that person, the question wasn't, can I make the horse and buggy go faster? It was like, how do I solve the problem of transportation? And so this motherfucker is like working on the combustible engine, you know? And that's the story. So one person is working on the horse and buggy, one person is working on the combustible engine. But the question is like, who is going to be the success and who is going to be the failure, right? We don't know, right? Because at that particular point in time, this like fictional era that this story is happening, who knows if like the world was ready for a combustible engine, you know? Or who knows if people could afford that, you know? So even if we were to measure ourselves based on these like external circumstances, it doesn't necessarily guarantee a win, right? And I think in that story, you know, the outcome, whatever the outcome is, let's say at that particular point, you know, there was a paradigm shift, right? And so the combustible engine was the shit that everybody wanted to have. Then that person was a failure. Was a success. The other person was a failure. The other person started drinking, lost all their money. This person became rich and wealthy. Or the world wasn't ready for that engine. That other person started drinking. You know how it goes. Fell off the map. The other person became great and made a lot of money. You know, so again, this like in my mind highlights to me how little control we have, you know, in like the grander scheme of things. So this is the chaos. And thank you very much. Okay, sorry. So you guys just missed like half of everything I was saying. That's cool. Okay, yeah. I've heard that joke like 17 times. But it was good. What was I saying? This might throw me off. Yeah, combustible engineering and drinking. Okay, so I think that when we measure ourselves by external expectations, which there's nothing wrong with, right? Because like we live in this like social world, and we have to like be part of people, be part of a community of people. So that's fine. But even if we did all that, right, and we measured ourselves by those standards, then we have this pressure of reality, which is unknown to us. Like we can't tell what's going to happen. I can't tell what's going to happen. Some people can predict trends, but I think that generally, you know, it's some sort of like reverse engineering. People just see something and then ex post they begin to like figure out what happened based on like a reality that exists. So my point is that I think this is an interesting idea of, I present to you agnostic potential, right? So I think in the analogy of the horse and buggy and the engine, you know, we don't know how the story is going to end, right? But what we do know is that there's this potential in those two ideas. And the direction in which those two ideas go, which is really judged by, you know, like the collective whims or the collective interests of people. So if people decide we want a horse and buggy or we want a combustible engine, that like collective decision that nobody can really, I think, can predict becomes the arbiter of what success is, right? So I think like, so that is agnostic potential. And that to me is like when you have a revolution. So when, you know, something isn't working or people think something isn't working and then they say, I'm gonna like change this, right? And so they sometimes pick up guns, sometimes they start writing, sometimes they build engines, you know, and then they change the stuff. But this agnostic potential, right? This desire to like build an engine or build whatever you're building is based on like internal, like your internal motivation. You know, it's not based on what you think other people want. It's based on what you want. So which brings me to like I guess the other part of what I've been thinking is, and this is like my constant struggle. And then I'm gonna come back and just talk about like just like practical stuff because I know this might be too weird. So I think like personally, like where I have failed is when I have like an idea or concept of myself, of the world, you know, and I say it, and I'm confident about this idea, right? Because it's been with me forever, it's mine. And I'm not even talking about like a business or anything. I'm talking about like just generally how I see the world, you know. And then I realized that my idea only extends just beyond like my feet, right? It doesn't really envelope the world. So I'm talking to people and people are looking at me like, this motherfucker is crazy, like you guys right now. You know, like this guy is crazy because I have this idea and you guys have that idea. And I think that the gap between, you know, our individual perspectives and the perspectives of other people, you know, closing that gap is to me like success or failure. That's really where it is for me. That like being able to understand somebody, to empathize with people, or not even empathize, but being able to recognize that maybe you don't have the best ideas, or maybe you're just like wrong, you know? And not necessarily like wrong fundamentally, but wrong in this like particular situation. And, but then this like, for me, this is some sort of like dissonance, like cognitive dissonance, like a huge stress, you know? So the restaurant that this is my little stories that I'm supposed to like throw in here. The restaurants that I own, the restaurant that I own with my friend Peter is like a perfect example of this for me. And actually, shout out to Peter because he's there right now working. I'm here, not working. But like Peter and I are very different. And I would say something to him and he would be like, "Today, have you even researched that?" I'm like, "But this is how I feel, you know? I don't need research." But then he, you know, is very meticulous and he like does research about everything. Like he can tell you, I'm serious, he can tell you like what was it? He was telling me how we were trying to make what was it? Like an apron, and this motherfucker like measured the size of our corkscrews, the length, so that we could like have the exact like pocket that we put the apron, you know, like that kind of stuff that I would never do, right? But in my opinion, I think we already have all these prejudices, right? And we just sort of like follow our prejudice towards facts that validate those prejudices. You know, I mean, that's how I feel. I could be wrong, but I think that, you know, in working in a business with somebody who's different, that this, you know, this like work to bridge that gap between my idea of like no research and his idea of like measuring corkscrews, you know, is really like, I mean, that's, first of all, that's where the conflict is. That is where the reward is as well. And that's where the potential for failure is. That's where the potential for success could
possibly be. But then, so if, I have 4 minutes, okay, cool. And I thought I didn't have anything to say. I have a lot to say. Okay, so this is dissonance, right? So this difference between your perspective and other people's perspective, and then, so like bridging the gap is consonance. You guys come together, you make love, it's great, and you feel good about your life. But then the real, like for me, the challenge is like, the reason why I experience confusion is because I feel like if I feel so strongly about this thing, which is my truth, and this guy feels strongly about this thing, which is his truth, so it means there are like two truths, you know, because I'm stubborn, he's stubborn. So my perspective is that these two things are true, and if these two things are true, then that shit is fucked up. Like just like fucked up my brain. I'm like, what? How is this possible? Right? Like you can have two things that are true, but it's possible because that's like life. Like that's reality for me anyway. Like for me, reality is generally when you have this grand paradox. Like two things that are true, and like so you have conservatives and liberals, and nobody's right, nobody's wrong, and there's this idea that somewhere you meet in the middle. But there is no middle, right? You just swing wildly from one side to the other. Like compromise isn't in the middle. Compromise is like in like taking somebody's perspective and swallowing it, and that person doing the same thing to yours and swallowing it. So it's not like a, you know, like you take 5 paces forward and they do the same thing, and you meet somewhere, you shake hands, and that's fine. So when I am encountered by like this paradox, generally what I do is like I fall asleep, I eat like a lot of food, and I watch Netflix. That's like how I react, right? And so this is like some sort of paralysis. So I'm paralyzed because these two things are, you know, they're kind of important, and they're both true. And I think this is the second opportunity for failure, right? Is when you do nothing. You know, when you're just like hanging out and gaining weight all the time. Because you're eating and watching Netflix. So I think this is failure again. But then, even though the world is complex, I think ultimately we're limited by choices. Like we're limited by outcomes. Right? We have a plethora of choices, but we have a scarcity of outcomes. So, for example, if you wanted to vote, you could probably only go to the voting booth and vote either for Barack Obama or John McCain, or somebody else, right? You couldn't vote for. So you no matter how like nuanced or like diverse or well thought out or researched your position is, you only have 2 options. And I think like generally, no matter where we're coming from or where we're going or how much I like get into my head and think about shit. It just comes down to one thing, right? Oh, sorry, a couple of things. You can't. The abundance of options isn't reflected in the available outcomes that you can choose. So, which makes paralysis kind of fine, because like you have to like choose. So I think then what success becomes is like overcoming that paralysis, which might be easier when you recognize that you have only a couple of options, and you just pick those options. So I think like I'm kind of done-ish, but like that's like my broad like whatever like thing about failure and like and non-failure. But I just want to say one thing in the 22nd minute of this talk. That's okay. And that one thing is like, so let's say everything I said was not true, right? And let's say people say, okay, well, you fail. Like there's a tangible, practical failure. Like you have a job, you don't do it, you fail. And I would say maybe, right? Because I would say that you can look at each moment, you know, in a moment, right? There's a possibility to fail, right? But you don't really know what that possibility is because you are working in the moment. And failure is this thing that is like future hitched and past obsessed. So you can't tell what a failure is going to be in the present because you don't know that shit, you know, because you can't see the future. And you can only like say what failure is in hindsight. You can only like look back and say, oh, I fucked up. You can't be fucking up as you're doing it unless you're a real fuck up. That's like, you know. But generally, like that's how things are. So even if something happens, you aren't going to know until after it has happened. So like you can't fail in the present. And let's say in the future you sort of like go back and think, oh, that thing made me fail. Sorry, that thing was a failure. But then standing from your current vantage point, which is the future of that past, this shit's getting crazy. Standing from where you are, then you have to sort of like pay homage to that failure because it brought you to where you are. Not in like a ridiculous sense. I mean, like if you lose a job and you get a new job, you can only have that new job because you lost your old job. I mean, it's like simple. It's as simple as that. This is not like Buddhism or whatever. It's just like a fact. So my personal story is and it's still happening, is that like I have all these like little failures and in the moment, like momentary failures or episodic failures that when I look back, they're all part of this like continuum of moments that led me to whatever it is that I have, which whatever. Like so, it's here, and I think like for me, like that's proof of not failing. Which doesn't mean like I don't like stress out when we have a dinner at Revolver and we haven't sold out, or like things are temporarily unfortunate. But I think like generally, maybe failure doesn't exist, and if it does, then I just fucked up.
I think that's a really great. I have a microphone. I think that's a really great chance to open up for questions. If there's any questions. Okay, so our icebreaker tag this morning is my last failure taught me. Tunde, if you'd like to talk about like what your last failure, or if you could even, like you said, like you have like non failures and not exactly like or like maybe like your last disappointment. That's probably easier to say. Like what is your last disappointment?
Relationship, what's that? I mean, I think, yeah, that's probably it, but that's not for this place. So here's the thing, like I think I swear to God, like if you ask Peter, or if you ask me if I was Peter, I would say like I always fuck shit up consistently. Like with our website, like I'm always like making like little mistakes. Like I would say dinner is like 6:30, but I'll tell people to come at 7, or I'll tell people to come at 7 the next week. Like just stuff like that. So, but those kinds of things that happen, again, to me, highlight like a greater thing, which is maybe I shouldn't be doing the website. Maybe I should do something else. So yeah, I think that's my. I don't know if that's good enough. But.
No, that's really great. I mean, I think everyone has like those points in life that.
I think the lady over there has a question, or she's just waving.
How do you overcome naysayers, like your close friends like myself? When you tell them you want to do something, they laugh in your face, tell you need a business plan, and dismiss you summarily.
Wait, so this is Sam. Sam's a good friend of mine. Sam, we hung out last week or something, and Sam told me, she's like, listen, today, I talk about you with our other friend Alok, and he says, you have overachieved. It's like, what?
No, I said you earned more than you deserve.
Yeah. I was like, this motherfucker doesn't know my parents. Like, they expect so much. So
My parents are Nigerian too.
yeah, that's. So I think, like, to answer your question, if that was for me, is that, how do I, the naysayers, I can't sleep at night. Those motherfuckers keep me up. I stay up. I mean, but I think, like, I think that, you know, that people are who they are, and I am who I am, and I'm trying to change. But like, you know, like, we have, I think we all have our own, like, internal conviction and compass. So I think no matter what sort of pressures we face, ultimately we just end up, or I do, end up doing what it is that I want to do. Not because I'm stubborn, but because, like I am compelled to. Like, I'm not, like, the reason why, like, and this is, people don't like this about me, and people like it about me. It's like, I always want to start something new. And the reason why I do is because that's just who I am. It's not like I wake up and I'm like, let me change the motherfucking world today. It's like, no, like, I just think of an idea and I'm like, fuck, how can I, like, make this happen? And then I try to get people around me who can help me make the idea happen. So a friend of mine was saying that you should just, because I was telling him, like, my struggle, this consonance and dissonance thing about how I feel a certain way and other people feel differently. And he was saying that I should focus on my highest and best use, you know, so focus on that. But at the same time, still be open to listen to other people. So I don't think there's an answer for that, Sam, because that was a horrible question. Next question.
I failed at the one.
Good morning. Actually, I do have an answer for that. I learned this several years ago. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I have 3 businesses now. And I get that question all the time. And when someone says, you know, why are you doing that? How do you know it's going to work? My answer to them is, and which of my bills are you going to pay this month? End of it. That's it. That's all I have to say.
That's the answer. Drop the mic on the floor. Boom.
So, well, I spent 4 years working on a project that I just never really had the passion for that I have for my other projects, and probably lost over $100,000 in some great 10-year-long relationships, and didn't do any worse on that one in some ways than on the projects that I really love, except I didn't gain anything out of that. So my answer to failure is do the things that you're passionate about and let it go if it goes, but skip the stuff that you don't really care that much about.
To piggyback what Miss Lisa said, I just turned 49 and I was excited about it. I just wanted to say, 2 years ago, I left the position that I held for 17 years, and I took my own walking retirement. And a lot of my friends were like, oh my God, what are you gonna do? You know, they looked at it as, I'm not even saying the word, that imagery. And they asked me what was I gonna do, and I didn't have any plans because I was guided to make this decision. Working at a place, passionate about children, but because of the field, I wasn't feeling that the energy was correct for families, the employees, and the students, so I couldn't be a part of that beast anymore. I kept telling my friends, they said, what are you gonna do? I said, I don't know. I said, I'm gonna do everything that I know how to do, and what I don't know how to do, I'm gonna learn. And that's what I've been doing for 2 years. And I'm still here, loving life and enjoying things. My mother got a diagnosis of being diagnosed with ALS, and she was diagnosed 2 weeks after I left. So I knew that that was my role. That's what I had to do, take care of my mother. She has passed on and made her transition, and I'm still filled with joy because that's what she was. And the way she left here, I don't know if I can relate with anybody else because it wasn't sad. My mother walked out of here strong. I don't know if I could ever tell people how, but that was my plight and with that imagery. Okay.
So with food, like people's palates are really interesting. You know, it can go either way. You know, sometimes even the best cooks can be deemed by others as not so great. But when did you know that this was something that you were passionate about, and what kept you going at it? What kept you at it?
So, for clarification, I don't cook at Revolver. We just have different, like, regarded chefs come there. And then the Nigerian barbecue pop-up concept, temporary, ephemeral, whatever restaurant. I do the cooking, but period. I do the cooking. But that happened because I was gonna get somebody else. He wanted something that I couldn't give him, so I was like, I'm gonna do the cooking. So my passion isn't necessarily for cooking or for restaurants or for even whatever. My passion is just like, honestly, like I just like ideas, and I like thinking about stuff. I like talking about stuff, and I also like doing stuff. I don't do stuff very well, but like I like maybe find somebody who can help. So I don't know if that answers the question. Like my passion is just to, like, again, that goes back to this like internal thing. Like I have this desire to just to do shit, and I just want to just like do it. I just want to keep doing it, because like this is a kind of like a personal thing. But if I don't do things, like if I stop, like I get really depressed, and I start like watching Netflix, and I start like eating, and I swear to God, I'm so serious. Like I get depressed, and so like I need to like constantly like do things, and that's what makes me not fat. Keeps me skinny, doing things. Was that like okay? I don't want to be facetious. I want to give you a real answer, but that's the honest truth.
So in your talk, you said several times that you don't believe that failure exists. Yet people do have huge setbacks. They dig holes. They fall into holes. They screw up. They make mistakes. So what do you see instead when those things happen? And do you just frame it differently? And where did that framing come from, or that perspective come from in your life? Is that something your parents taught you? How did you?
No, my parents not. Nigerian parents, they don't do that. It's like, it's all about, they're very. So I don't know. I think maybe. I have no idea. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's because, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Paul over here has one last thing I think is really good for a closing statement.
You only can draw as good as you can erase.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate it.